Hi, Professor Rick Rapetti here again, and this is the second subpart of my three-part lecture number 2 on the post-Socratics. This is lecture 2 of 2, but the lecture 2 of 2, once again, has 3 parts, 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3. 2.1 I just finished recently. That was on the Cynics. Today's lecture, 2.2 of 2, is on the Neoplatonists, and then the next and final one in this series of 2 lectures on post-Socratics is lecture 2.3 of 2, which is on Christianity. Okay, I will be doing some screen sharing first with my PowerPoint, just so you see the first page, which has the name of this lecture on it. So that you have the memory of what it looks like when you go back and look at the PowerPoint to study for the midterm exam. And also the second slide has a link to a YouTube video, which I already have opened up. So I'm going to have to switch off from screen sharing my PowerPoint and then go screen share with the YouTube video, and then come back to screen sharing with my PowerPoint, which I will then talk about what was in that little video that you saw, relatively short video. Okay, so let's do my first screen share with the PowerPoint, which is very similar to the PowerPoint of the last one. And here it is. Let me put on the slideshow. And if you saw the last one, you know that that was post-Socratics lecture 2.1 of 2. Why didn't I just make them lectures 2, 3, and 4? Well, because when I first thought about it, I thought I would have the Cynics, the Neoplatonists, and the Christians all in one lecture, lecture 2. But then when I got into it, I thought I should break it up to make it easier for you to learn each one separately, take a quiz on each one before you got confused by the next one, because some of these ideas overlap. Okay, so that's my justification. And let's now turn the page. And let me stop the, well, let me turn the page first. Oops, there it is. So yes, Neoplatonism. And that's the link. Once again, if you go back to this, not the lecture, but the PowerPoint for this lecture, those are the slides on it. You'll be able to click on that and get the YouTube video again if you want to see it again. All right, so let me first stop the screen share, and then start a screen share and go right to that lecture on Neoplatonism so that you get to see somebody else other than just me for a change.
During the several centuries following Plato's death in the mid-4th century BC, a continuing stream of philosophers had developed his thought by focusing on and amplifying its metaphysical and religious aspects. In the course of this development, the highest transcendent principle began to be called the One. New emphasis was placed on the flight from the body as necessary for the soul's philosophical ascent to the divine reality. The forms began to be located within the divine mind. An increased concern was shown for the problem of evil and its relation to matter. This stream found its culmination in the 3rd century AD in the work of Plotinus, who, by integrating a more explicitly mystical element into the Platonic scheme while incorporating certain aspects of Aristotelian thought, formulated a Neoplatonic philosophy of considerable intellectual power and universal scope. In Plotinus, Greek rational philosophy reached its endpoint and passed over into another, more thoroughly religious spirit, a super-rational mysticism. For in Plotinus's thought, the rationality of the world and of the philosopher's quest is but the prelude to a more transcendent existence beyond reason. The Neoplatonic cosmos is the result of a divine emanation from the Supreme One, which is infinite in being and beyond all description or categories. The One, also called the Good, in an overflow of sheer perfection produces the Other, the created cosmos in all its variety. in a hierarchical series of gradations, moving away from the ontological center to the extreme limits of the possible. The first creative act is the issuing forth from the one of the divine intellect or nous, the pervasive wisdom of the universe, within which are contained the archetypal forms or ideas that cause and order the world. From the nous comes the world soul, which contains and animates the world, is the source for the souls of all living beings, and constitutes the intermediate reality between the spiritual intellect and the world of matter. The emanation of divinity from the one is an ontological process, which Plotinus compared to the light that moves gradually outward from a candle until it at last disappears into darkness. The several gradations, however, are not separate realms in a temporal or spatial sense, but are distinct levels of being, timelessly present in all things. The three hypostases, one, intellect, and soul, are not literal entities, but rather spiritual dispositions, just as the ideas are not distinct objects, but rather different states of being of the divine mind. The material world, existing in time and space and perceptible to the senses, is the level of reality furthest from the unitary divinity. As the final limit of creation, it is characterized in negative terms as the realm of multiplicity, restriction, and darkness, as lowest in ontological stature, holding the least degree of real being, and as constituting the principle of evil. Yet it is also, despite its deep imperfection, characterized in positive terms as a creation of beauty, an organic whole produced and held together by the world's soul in a universal harmony. It imperfectly reflects on the spatio-temporal level the glorious unity and diversity that exists on a higher level in the spiritual intellect's world of forms. The sensible is a noble image of the intelligible. Although evil exists within this harmony, that negative reality plays a necessary role in a larger design, and ultimately affects neither the perfection of the one nor the well-being of the philosopher's highest self. Man, whose nature is soul and body, has potential access to the highest intellectual and spiritual realms, though this is dependent on his liberation from materiality. Man can rise to the consciousness of the world's soul, thereby becoming in actuality what he already is potentially, and thence to the universal intellect. Or he can remain bound to the lower realms. Because all things emanate from the one through the intellect and the world's soul, and because the human imagination at its highest participates in that primal divinity, man's rational soul can imaginatively reflect the transcendent forms, and thus, through this insight into the ultimate order of things, move toward its spiritual emancipation. The entire universe exists in a continual outflow from the one into creative multiplicity, which is then drawn back to the one, a process of emanation and return always moved by the one's superfluity of perfection. The philosopher's task is to overcome the human bondage to the physical realm by moral and intellectual self-discipline and purification, and to turn inward to a gradual ascent back to the absolute. The final moment of illumination transcends knowledge in any usual sense and cannot be defined or described, for it is based on an overcoming of the subject-object dichotomy between the seeker and the goal. It is a consummation of contemplative desire that unites the philosopher with the one. Thus, Plotinus articulated an elaborately coherent rationalist and idealist metaphysics, which found its fulfillment in a unitary mystical apprehension of the supreme Godhead. With confident and meticulous precision, and in often startling beautiful prose, Plotinus described the complex nature of the universe and its participation in the divine. Basing his philosophy on the Platonic doctrine of transcendent ideas, he then added or drew out several new defining features: teleological dynamism, hierarchy, emanation, and super-rational mysticism. In this form, Neoplatonism became the final expression of classical pagan philosophy, and it assumed the role of Platonism's historical carrier in subsequent centuries.
Sorry about that. Let's get back to my PowerPoint now, where I will continue the lecture. Basically just expounding in greater detail on everything that you just saw. Okay, so what's the connection between Plato and the Neoplatonists? Well, what does neo mean? Do you remember? Neo means new. Neapolis is new city, which is Naples, or in Italian, Napoli, southwestern Italy, former new city of the Greek Empire. Okay, so neo means new, just like Neo in the Matrix, the new man. So these are the new Platonists. That's what a Neoplatonist is. So the Neoplatonism lasted for a number of centuries after the death of Plato. And by the way, Plato's academy, that university that he opened up and where he taught Aristotle and Euclid for many years, lasted for 7 or 8 centuries after Plato's death, by the way. I think it was eventually shut down by one of the popes. Shut down that pagan university. There's the battle between religion and non-religious philosophy. They just called them pagans if they didn't believe in, Catholicism. Okay, so why are they called Neoplatonists? Well, they had the same kind of two worlds metaphysics. What is metaphysics? Again, your model of reality, right? Your theory of what exists or what is real. Remember, Plato said there's the visible world, right? The line that separates the invisible but intelligible world from the visible but not really intelligible world. The visible world is a world of opinions, shadows, mere reflections of eternal truths, the forms, the pure concepts or pure ideas, right? That exist in some kind of super rational dimension of reason, right? Or accessible through and only understandable by way of reason, right? Okay, and insight and philosophical analysis, right? Definitions, right, are more real than the things that they define, like a definition of a dog or a triangle, because the definition is a concept. But above the concept is something even higher. The concept is just a reflection of the pure idea itself, the essence of the triangle. That's the form of the triangle, right? So 2 worlds, the world of forms, right, and pure ideas and concepts, and then the visible world, the world that you could perceive actual dogs and triangles and whatnot in, right? And if you recall, Plato compared those things with the shadows on a wall in the cave, right? And the prisoners who thought those are the real things until they go outside and see, no, there's real dogs, not just wooden decoy dogs or ducks or whatever, right? So the shadows are less real than the decoys casting the shadow, and the decoy ducks are not as real as the real ducks out there above the ground with the real sunlight on them, not just the shadow in the cave, right? But even those real ducks in the physical, visible world, right, are more real than the wooden ducks, which are more real than the shadows. But the pure form, the concept, the essence of a duck, that's eternal, that's intelligible, that's in the higher realm, right? So these 2 worlds, okay? The lower visible world is less real, just like a shadow or an image in a mirror is less real than the object that casts a shadow or that causes the mirror to have the image, right? But the higher world of forms, the closer you get to the forms, the more real you are, right? And then the form of the forms, right? All forms are just instances of the greater form. The form of all forms, what Plato called the good, right? So that's Platonism. That's Plato's metaphysics. It's a 2-world metaphysics, right? The world of appearances, that's Heraclitus's world, the world that's constantly changing, can't step into the same river twice. And the unchanging, eternally true world of total pure being, which is Parmenides' world, the world in which nothing ever changes. 2 + 2 = 4 eternally. And the concept of a triangle is eternal and changeless, right? So he combined, if you recall, Parmenides and Heraclitus, right? The rationalists and the empiricists. Okay, the form of all forms is the good, which gives it a positive thing, like it's the benevolent thing that's at the center of everything, right? Everything is less real. The good is the highest, greatest being. It has the most being and the most reality. The forms are a little lesser than the form of all forms, right? Each individual, and then each thing that's an instance of the form in the visible world, or a shadow of even that, etc. Less and less being. So at the center, at the top, is the form of all forms, which is the good. Then there's the realm of forms around that, like maybe an outer circle. And then there's all the things that the forms are represented in the changing world on the periphery of this moving thing, which doesn't move in the middle, right? Just reminding you of Plato's metaphysics. And so the Neoplatonists, they take all that, they accept it all. But what's new about it is that they call that good the form of the forms, which Plato called the good. They call it the one, because it's the one being. It's the one ultimate reality. As Parmenides said, reality is just one. There's no real many, right? And Plato said, well, yeah, they kind of look like there's many, but they're just reflections of the unchanging one somehow or another, right? But the Neoplatonists go a step further. They say the one is divine, right? It's some kind of divinity. It's a divine eternal being. It's a source of all being, and everything else is part of it. It's not really separate from it, right? It's hard to kind of map all that out, but here's the little picture. So at the top is the one, the absolute, the ultimate reality, you might want to say, right? And out of that emanates the forms, right? Well, it emanates a divine mind, like a consciousness. So there's being at the top, and then there's its mindedness, its consciousness, nous, or in other models, it's called logos, right? Which means the word. But remember Heraclitus and a number of these pre-Socratics and Anaxagoras, they believed in nous or logos, right? Heraclitus called it the logos, and Anaxagoras called it nous, which means mind. Logos means the intelligibility principle of being, right? Well, the Neoplatonists are uniting these two things. There's one divine essence or source of everything. Out of that emanates a mind or consciousness, which is the divine mind or nous or logos, right? And logos is what makes everything intelligible. It's the rationally ordered principle that, like the arche of the world, right? And of all beings in it who have minds, right? And then it's like layers of emanation. What is emanation? Like, to use his model, a candle light emanates from the sun, right? It spreads out from it. So there's being, and being spreads out into mind, and in mind are all the forms. Those are the contents of nous or logos. And then from the forms emanate the world soul, from the nous, the mind, and logos, all that together, a world soul, like a kind of spirit that contains the entire world and gives birth to the world of the senses, right? So layers and layers and layers of emanation, right? And then we're in the bottom in our bodies in the sensory world. Here we are, I have flesh, and senses and everything, so I can perceive the visible world, right? But then I can transcend that in a contemplation or meditation or philosophical reflection, right? And go deeper into and transcend what I merely see, using Plato's method of, what's the word? I used it in a previous lecture, anagage, ascension, philosophical transcendence or heightening, or climbing up a ladder is ascending, right? Rather than descending, right? So I can go up and tune into the world soul, right? And then go deeper and tune into logos or nous. And when I'm in that place, I can sense the one, because I am the one. We're all part of there's only one of us, as Parmenides said, right? There's only one reality. If it looks like there's many, they're all like fingers on the one hand or something like that. Or on the edge of a rug where you've got those little fibers that are like fingers on a hand, right? The emanations go out to the end, right? And like those rays of the light that go in toward the darkness. Okay. So there's Plotinus again. I used to always think his name was Plotinus, but I keep hearing it Plotinus. I'll assume that I had it wrong. And he lived in the 3rd century of the Common Era, CE, or after Christ, right? In Egypt, which was at the time part of Rome, part of the Roman Empire. It was a Roman province. I don't know if that's the word they use, a Roman territory. Okay, so they believed in, then if you want to break that thing down on the previous page, there's a trinity there, right? Of the one, the nous, and the world soul. That's a kind of divine trinity. And then the actual sensory world is not in and of itself treated as divine, right? And the world soul gives birth to the world. So the physical world is like the body of the world soul, in the same way as this body of mine is the body of my mind, right? Something like that. Okay. So yes, and there's this, remember, I think it was Anaximenes, yeah, who said that you've got condensing and evaporating, right? Like with water, it gets condensed, steam gets condensed, and you got water droplets, and then they evaporate, they spread out, they thin out, they become rarefied. This, condensing and expanding things. That's a kind of mechanism of physics, right? That explains how the universe works. Well, here, the one has emanation outward and then a transcendence. So there's like a 2-directional relationship between it manifesting and expressing itself, extending outward, but also anything at the periphery can extend back or reverse extend or transcend its being at the least level of being and rise up to the highest level, because it's all connected. It's all really one, right? So emanation and transcendence. Emanation sometimes down, transcendence sometimes seen as up, right? So the one emanates the intellect, the cosmic mind, nous or logos, which means word, but remember, words are intelligible. And the logos, the cosmic mind, contains Plato's forms, right? The form of a triangle, the form of a man, the form of this, the form of that. And the forms emanate their reflections in the world soul, right? Which manifest as objects in the physical world, right? So that candle flame model, once again, think of rays reaching out into the darkness, right? So you've got a candle flame or a sun with arrows of light shooting off into the darkness as far as they could go until they stop and there's nothing there. And darkness represents nothing, right? So the one kind of reaches out like hair coming off of a head in the wind or something, right? Emanation. That's the model that Plotinus used anyway. Darkness is the edge or the limit of the real, right? It's the least real, like maybe hairs are the thinnest parts of my body extending outward, right? Or light rays are, there's less light in them than there is in the sun or in a flame itself, right? Using fire, as Heraclitus did, as a model. If you think about it, all these different models are trying to get the arche. They all think that there's one kind of principle, but the Neoplatonists are the ones who said it's a one. They called it the one. Well, one of the very first ones, I think it was Anaximander, he said everything is boundless. There's no boundary to anything. So that would mean that everything is one also. Parmenides also said there's only one, right? So they all had different ideas about the one is kind of like, well, what's it made out of? Oh, it's made out of fire, because all those reasons Heraclitus had: change, slow burn, all that, right? Energy is like fire, right? Thales, it's like water, because water can change forms and the world changes forms, but there's still one. It's all the same. It's all water, right? When you put it all into this kind of perspective, now that we've studied a number of these different versions of it, by the time we get to Plotinus, all those previous pieces all look like just slightly different attempts to understand the same thing on very similar terms, right? The arche or the one, what is it made out of? What kind of stuff is it like in the world? It's got to be like this kind of stuff. No, it's got to be more like that kind of stuff. That's really all it is. All right, but this is an abstract model that doesn't really say what the one is. It just says there's the one. Well, what is it? It's the form of all forms, right? So all the forms emanate from something greater than the forms, which is not only the good, as Plato called it, but it's one, it's the one, and it's divine, right? It takes on a spiritual, mystical element. And then by going inward somehow or another, we can transcend and connect our mind with the cosmic mind, and then remember our true nature or experience our true self as the one itself, right? We're all part of the same being, the same reality. Okay. Yeah. The further out you go, the less real and the more evil, because of course it's evil and goodness are like darkness and light. So in the sun, you've got the most good, the most light. And as the rays reach out into the darkness, they're more like blending. Think of a model where you blend black ink with more and more water so that it becomes grayer and grayer and grayer until it has almost no color at the edge, the slightest little bit of gray, right? In the water, right? So the water without the black in it is different from the water that has more and more black in it, closer to the source of all the ink, let's just say, right? I'm trying to use different metaphors so you get the idea about less being, less light, less goodness, less divinity in the physical world where our bodies are, because that's the edges of the light, in the candle flame metaphor, Plotinus's metaphor. Okay, and yet, even though there's darkness and evil and less being in the physical, visible world of our bodies and all this matter and everything, right? The whole, if you could take in the picture of the whole thing, it's magnificent and beautiful. There's an elaborate divine plan. It's highly complex. It's so much more. Like humming is to a symphony, I should say humming is to rap music, and rap music is like to a symphony, just in terms of richness and complexity, right? Like it's effortless to kind of hum, but then at least if you rap, there has to be a little bit of a beat and some meaning and lyrics, right? But symphonies are really complex levels of rich meaning and harmony and all this kind of thing, and multiple instruments and everything, right? Some voices or whatever, and meaning and all that. So the analogy that I'm making is that, yes, there's ugliness and evil and darkness and less being at the furthest down into the physical world that you go. But when you take up the whole picture, it's like a symphony compared to a little humming, right? That's the analogy there. There's a divine plan, a cosmic order that's beyond, it's perfect, the whole thing, right? The whole thing, when you see the whole, that's perfection, according to this model. These ideas will live on later on. And transcendence is when you experience philosophical enlightenment, spiritual illumination, when you can perceive Plato's form of the forms, the good, the one, that's enlightenment on this model, right? It's a contemplative, meditative ascension from your separateness and the least aspect of your being, right? You've been identifying with your finger, right? Or your fingernail or a little piece of hair, one little hair, but you're the whole body, right? So you go from being just like that little hair on the edge of reality to experiencing the whole thing, right? That's ascension, rising up from the tiniest to the boundless, right? Okay, that's that model. So here's that candle flame metaphor once again. And one more time, let's look at a different diagram, right? At the top, you've got the one. So if it's really one, as Parmenides said, it's not divisible. There's nothing in it that can really be divided. It really is just one, right? It's unified. Uno means one. Unit or unity or unification, right? Means to make one, right? So it's united, it's unified, it's not dividable, and it's transcendent. It's beyond all the differentiations that in Heraclitus's world, where things look like there's many, right? Parmenides would say, no, it's all one, right? So this is a kind of explanation about how you could have the appearance of many and have one at the same time, right? So go back to the battle between Heraclitus and Parmenides. Plato tried to solve it by saying, well, we've got Heraclitus's world, we've got the world of the forms, that doesn't change, but that wasn't one, the world of the forms, right? And it doesn't explain. He said, yeah, the the world of the many, the visible world, the world that changes is a reflection of that world that never changes. But then why does the reflection change if the thing that it's reflecting never changes, right? So there were problems in Plato's attempt to explain how you could have both Parmenides' changeless world and Heraclitus' world of change, right? This is a much richer, philosophically, much more coherent attempt to explain how all of that could be consistent and true at the same time, right? It's all one. It emanates, it spreads out like light from a center of a fire or a candle or a sun or whatever, right? And when the one kind of is spreading out, it's becoming less real than its divine self. It's almost like God, right? Then you got this cosmic mind, right? See all the light coming out from the center above the candle flame, right? So like in the center, the brightest part is like the one, and then the second rung out is like the cosmic mind. And then you got all those little things at the edges, right? The little dots, those are like the manifestations in the physical world, right? It's just a model to try to help you understand that. But the intellect over here is the logos or the nous, right? Which emanates from the center of the one, the brightest and a little less bright. And then from that mind of the one comes a world soul, which is a spirit, which then manifests as the body of the world, the cosmos, the physical cosmos, right? Which has two features at the bottom of the diagram there, physical matter and individual souls. So just like the world soul is like kind of the body of the world intellect or the cosmic mind, individually within the world soul, and there's a physical universe with individual bodies that have individual souls in them. And the soul in every individual being who has a soul is like a direct beam of light from the center of the one, right? So the individual soul and the cosmic soul, so to speak, right? The world soul are united. There's no separation between them. And that world soul is just an outer layer of the being at the center of it, which is one, which is divine. All right. So you'll see later on this semester that this is a very similar model to what we get in Hinduism, in Orthodox Indian, some branches of Orthodox Indian philosophy, which some scholars think certainly Alexander the Great brought philosophers with him when he conquered parts of Northwest India, which today include, Pakistan and Afghanistan and parts of that whole region. I forget how far into India he got, but he got pretty far. And so Alexandrian cities were there for quite a while. And, lots of Indian philosophers argued with lots of Greek philosophers back then, and those ideas came back to Greece. So it may very well be that some of these ideas came from that part of the world. All right, that's the end. So let me get my end the screen. Oops, almost hit the wrong button there. And open up my PowerPoint again. Okay, so this should work. Let me turn on the presentation. Oh, I did that already. Oh, what's the matter? Oh, it's over. You saw the video, and I'm losing my mind over here. I apologize. I've been on a marathon recently, a few weeks. Personal stories are irrelevant, but I'm a human being, so I'm a person. But in the last few weeks, like I mentioned in my announcements to the class, which is why I was behind a little bit on my grading, but I managed to submit that book that I've been working on. I was a little late, but I got it in, and the publisher's very happy with it. So I'm very happy. So you can be very happy, because when I'm happy, I'm nicer to everybody else. All right, so let's pause a little bit, and let me shut off the screen share completely and just talk to you for a minute, some random thoughts about Neoplatonism before I shut down. So once again, just to recap, sorry, I was talking fast. I do that when I'm excited. I also didn't want this to go too long. Neo means new. The new Platonists, they're followers of Plato. what is it that they took from Plato and what did they change? They took almost everything of the key metaphysics from Plato, his belief in a two-tiered world, the eternal Parmenidean kind of world that is changeless. But in that world, Plato's mind, in Plato's theory, that world is populated by the forms, the pure essences of the things that are reflected in the visible, physical, less real world, right? Which are like shadows on the cave compared to the outer reality in his cave metaphor, right? So they bought that, they accepted it, but Plato said all the forms, right, are just instances of the form of all forms, just like all humans are just instances of the form of human. All triangles are just instances of the form of triangle, but the form of triangle, the form of human, the form of circle, the form of this, the form of that, those are all just instances of the more abstract form of forms. What is it to be in essence? So this is the essence of this kind of being. This is the essence of that kind of being, the essence of a triangle, the essence of a person, the essence of any kind of geometrical figure or whatever, right? Well, all of those essences, they're different kinds of essences, right? But they're all essences. So they are reflections of the essence of essence, or the form of all forms, which Plato thought was inherently good. As a philosopher who's a lover of wisdom, having access to the form of all forms is having access to the highest wisdom, which is inherently good, right? Lovers of wisdom love wisdom. So they believe that wisdom is inherently good. It's intrinsically good, even if, unlike science, right? Much of science is seen as instrumentally good, to use Aristotle's term, right? You go to school so you can get a better job, so you can make more money, so you can buy the things and do the things that you love. And those are the things that you value intrinsically. All the things leading up to it, you only value them instrumentally because they're instrumental towards you getting to the thing that you value, right? Look, these reminders are going to help you on your exam, by the way. This is why I don't do review, because I build the reviews in wherever I can, right? Okay, so philosophers love wisdom, and in Plato's philosophy, the highest wisdom is from the highest philosophical insight or intuition into the nature of reality, which is not only the essence of things, but the essence of essence itself. And because wisdom is inherently good, right? I'm making my own rationalization for why Plato thought that the form of all forms is the good, right? Because knowledge and wisdom must emanate from the good, right? And like, what are some of the things that are like the good, right? There's the true. Philosophers want to know what's true, and everything that's true partakes in truth. So there's a form of truth, right? Philosophers care about beauty, right? So everything that's beautiful in the world, right? It's not just that this color and that shape put together happen to be beautiful in that combination, because you could have similar combinations with similar colors, right? But they might not be beautiful, right? So Plato thought if something is beautiful, it literally is reflecting the form of beauty, right? Somehow or another, beauty is instantiated or manifest in that object. It partakes in it. In the same way that all red things reflect the essence of redness, right? In the invisible realm, it just kind of shines off of objects, redness, beauty. That painting has got beauty touched it somehow or another, right? It's kind of a weird view. But getting back to the good, right? The form of all forms, Plato considered it the good because it's got the form of beauty in it. It's got the form of truth in it, right? They are subforms of the form of all, the essences of all, they're essences that partake in the essence of all essences, right? Which is the form of the good. What else? What are some key things that are close to the form of the good itself? So there's truth, there's beauty, there's certainly love, there is justice, right? The true, the good, the beautiful, the just, and maybe the holy, divinity, right? All those things are like major important essences in the world. So they have forms themselves, that all those examples are just partaking in them, the way red things partake in redness, the form of red, right? And so all those wonderful abstract things that govern everything that matters to us, truth, beauty, justice, the right, the good, and so on, they're all in the form of all forms, or the essence of all essences. And so it's obvious, if you're a philosopher and a lover of wisdom and truth and all those things, you will think that the form of the essence of all essences of the things that matter to all of us is the most good and the most real, right? And that's what you seek to understand with your philosophical investigations and contemplation, right? And the closer you get to that, the more it reflects in your mind, and the more you partake in it and reflect it in your being and in your life, right? So now when you get to the Neoplatonists, they just go a step further with that, and they say, that's one, that's the one, it's the source of all things, right? It's not only good, it's divine, right? But they add to it this emanation and transcendence, this two-way interpenetration between the one and the many, where they're not separate at all, right? They're not separate objects. The forms aren't separate from the cosmic mind or the logos or the nous. They're like nodes in it or something, or dispositions or potentials or something like that, right? They're just modes of the same thing. There are layers and levels of the same thing. It's all one. Why call it one if there's more than one? No, there's only one, right? So they add that, and it becomes kind of mystical, religious. It's a deep spiritual or mystical transformation of Plato. It emphasizes the mystical, the magical, the spiritual, right? There's one, we're all one. It's the good. It's not only the good, it's the divine, right? So it's spiritual and supernatural and natural at the same time. The natural world and the supernatural world are kind of interconnected. And that's about all I have to say about the Neoplatonists, except I should add one more thing. They had a very powerful influence on Christianity, which, developed around the same time, right? Neoplatonism runs into the first several centuries and influences the bulk of European history in the way that it influenced the church, the Christian church. Originally, both churches, but more of an influence on the Western church. In around 500 something AD or Common Era, there was a split between the Roman Catholics side of the church in Rome and the Eastern Orthodox side of the church in Constantinople, which became the Greek Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox, or all those Eastern Orthodox churches from the split from Rome. All right. And then like the Neoplatonic influence moved more toward Rome than it did the other way. But more on that in my next lecture on Christianity. All right, folks, I hope this was interesting, and I'll see you soon.